I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the Menendez brothers. It's a story and a case that put court TV on the national map. And here we are more than 30 years later, and it's still making huge news. The issues in this case are important and very relevant to the discussion of what is justice. Here's their story. It is one of Court TV's most legendary trials, the Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik. In 1989, their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, were murdered. It was a shocking crime scene that looked like a mob hit. Jose and Kitty were shot several times as they sat on their couch eating ice cream and watching a movie. At first, Erik and Lyle were treated as victims, but when their therapist's ex-girlfriend came forward with information that the brothers had confessed during therapy sessions, everything changed. Eventually, the brothers were charged. At trial, they claimed to be the victims of sex abuse and violence. The first juries could not reach a unanimous verdict, and there was a mistrial. But when they were retried, they were convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Now, there is new attention on the case, and many are calling for the Menendez brothers to get out. Life without the possibility of parole. That was the sentence. That was the sentence after their convictions. Without parole means you don't get out. You spend the rest of your life until you die behind bars. But all of a sudden things are changing a little bit, and it's changing a lot right now because of the district attorney, the prosecutor, the man in charge. Take a listen.
Let me begin by telling you that this is a case where we've had many people in this office spend a great deal of time reviewing the case. I have to tell you unequivocally that we don't have a universal agreement. There are people in the office that strongly believe that the Menendez brothers should stay in prison the rest of their life. And they do not believe that they were molested. And there are people in the office that strongly believe that they should be released immediately and that they were in fact molested. I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate. And I am going to recommend that to a court tomorrow. What that means in this particular case is that we're going to recommend to the court that the life without the possibility of parole be removed and that they will be sentenced for murder, which, because there are two murders involved, that will be 50 years to life. However, because of their age, under the law, since they were under 26 years of age at the time that these crimes occurred, they will be eligible for parole immediately. Okay, well, I mean, the bottom line here is you're hearing from the DA recommending that, yeah, they should be eligible to be set free. That's what the district attorney is saying, the prosecutor in the case. And he mentioned this concept of resentencing, which brings me to my first question in this investigation, which is, what is a resentencing? This is something relatively unique to California, but something we're going to have to dive into here and figure out. I think that's where it all starts. Let me introduce my guests. Criminal defense attorney, former Los Angeles County prosecutor, Josh Ritter is with us, and also joining us, one of the jurors from the first trial of the Menendez brothers and the author of the book, Hung Jury, The Diary of a Menendez Juror, Hazel Thornton is with us. Thank you both for being here. Okay, before we answer this question, and Josh, you really answer this question for me, all the legal aspects of it, I want to take a listen to George Gascon and what he said and the way he explained this resentencing. And you have to understand that the way the process works, when you're talking about a resentencing under the law, it really focuses not necessarily on what the original crimes were, but it focuses on, has the person been rehabilitated, number one, And number two, can they be released safely into their community? They went to prison for life without the possibility of parole, which meant that certainly under the law at that time, they had no hopes of ever getting out. They could have done what many other people do, which is basically said, you know what, I'm here for the rest of my life, so I'm going to do whatever. I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to join gangs, I'm going to live the life of the person. But they never did that. To the contrary, even though they didn't think that they would ever be left free, they engaged in a different journey. A journey of redemption and a journey of rehabilitation. This case will be filed in court tomorrow. The final decision will be made by the judge. Court has to agree with my conclusion that they deserve to be resentenced.
Okay, let me start here, Josh. I mean, what he's describing, and I want you to explain it to us as well, is like a parole. It's like parole for those who don't get parole. I'm very confused. I thought life without parole meant life without parole, but resentencing sounds like the same criteria that you would look at for someone to get out on parole. So why even have life without parole?
And after hearing the way that he explained it, I completely understand your confusion. I don't know if I'd entirely agree with his explanation. He's saying it's based upon their behavior since their time in prison. Resentencing is not entirely uncommon. It does happen, but usually it happens when there's been some sort of change in the law, some sort of sentencing guideline has changed, and people who are in prison want to take advantage of that, and they're requesting to be resentenced under new laws. This situation is different. This situation is, as he described, it really is based almost entirely on how they've behaved since their time in prison, because the law has not changed. And so essentially what he's saying is that they were sentenced to not just murder, but murder with special circumstances, which, by the way, made them eligible for the death penalty. They received life without parole, but now he's saying, I'm going to essentially ask the court to remove those special circumstances, make this more, for lack of a better term, a garden variety first-degree murder, which would give them the possibility of parole.
Let me ask you, Hazel, because you know the evidence, the story, you know these two men, the allegations better than any of us, right? What's your reaction to all these developments, and what are your thoughts about Lyle and Erik right now?
I think it's long overdue for their case to be looked at. I know they exhausted all their appeals, but they also had a travesty of a second trial where none of the evidence of abuse of any kind was allowed during the guilt phase. And there are lots of types of abuse. If you didn't believe that they were sexually abused, you could remove that from the equation. And there were also physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and there were 50 witnesses testifying on their behalf to all of those things. So if that helps people these days get a more lenient sentence, then they should have gotten one 30 years ago, and they never did. So it's about time. They have served 35 years. If they had been sentenced, if they had been convicted of manslaughter, which is what I voted for in 1994, they would have served 22 years maximum and been out long ago.
Josh, let me ask you about the logistics now of this. A judge has a say in this, and a parole board as well. So, to go from where they are now to being set free, explain the process, and then explain from your perspective the chances of this going all the way to Erik and Lyle walking out of the prison free men.
No, you're absolutely right. There is a process, and the process actually got slightly more complicated than we thought it was going to be after his announcement. But first they're going to petition the court. So the DA doesn't have the power to just simply say, I'm going to resentence them. They have to petition a judge. It will go back to the same trial court in which the trial was heard, not the same judge. That judge has left the bench. That judge will have to make a decision based upon the law, based upon the facts, based upon briefs received from the DA's office and the defense and perhaps other interested parties.
Will there be testimony? Will there be testimony? Are people going to get up on a witness stand to talk about?
It's interesting because it's a sentencing hearing, and in California, victims or the families of victims are entitled to be heard at sentencing hearings. So there may be family members who give testimony. And then if that judge decides that they agree with that sentencing recommendation from the DA's office, then they will be resentenced and then only become eligible for parole. So you're right, before they're even ever released, they have to then go before a parole board, and that's anyone's guess as to when that could actually first take place.
Well, I have like 15 seconds here, though, Josh. You're in California. Give me your best estimate on their chances of being released.
I think they have a very good chance of being released. I think when you have people recommended for parole by the DA's office, they're not going to oppose it, given their record in prison, given the fact that they would have served their time. I think they've got a very good chance of being paroled.
Unbelievable developments. All right, guests are staying with us. Coming up next, here's another question. Why now?
There was a more recent documentary about the case that again brought a tremendous amount of public attention.
Sarah Boone is charged with second-degree murder after her boyfriend suffocated inside of a suitcase.
He's in the suitcase still. There are multiple domestic violence incidents.
You two hitting each other.
Sarah. That's my name. Don't wear it up.
He's telling you, Sarah, I can't breathe.
George Torres locked inside of a suitcase, begging for help.
I thought he was okay.
The Suitcase Murder Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
You indicated earlier that, in an earlier note, that things had pretty much remained constant for about 3 weeks. Is that correct? And these numbers that are reflected here, is that pretty much how it's been for the last 3 weeks? Okay. All right, then the court finds, based upon the statement of the foreman and all of the jurors, that there is no reasonable probability that a verdict can be reached in this matter as to any count and as to any verdict. And therefore, the court finds that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked and declares a mistrial in this matter. And the jurors will be discharged from further service in this case. The court, in reviewing this numerical breakdown, finds, in addition to the remarks of the jury and the jury foreman, that there is no reasonable probability of the jury reaching a unanimous verdict in this case as to any count or any charge. Therefore, I find that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked, and the court declares a mistrial in this matter.
Wow. The end of the first trial. The second trial you didn't see. They banned the cameras and they banned a bunch of evidence as well, which was problematic for another reason. I want to go through the timeline of the entire case to get a better understanding here. It was August of 1989 when the murders actually took place. Jose and Kitty Menendez were shot and killed. March of 1990, 21-year-old Lyle was arrested. 18-year-old Erik turns himself in. 1993, July, that's when that first trial began. January 1994, deadlock. Long trial, folks. Long trials, California. October 1995, the retrial began, and then into March of 96, Erik and Lyle were convicted of first-degree murder. July of 1996, they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And here we are now with the district attorney requesting and petitioning the court for Erik and Lyle to be resentenced so they can be eventually released. Which brings me to my next question, which is, why now? What is it? Why right now is all of this happening? Still with me, Josh Ritter and Hazel Thornton. Let's let George Gascon give his reasoning first, and then we'll talk about the bigger picture. Here he is.
The reason why I'm here today and why I came in front of all of you about 10 days ago is because there was a more recent documentary about the case that again brought a tremendous amount of public attention. And we know there have been other documentaries, so this is not the first, this is a more recent one. And frankly, our office got flooded with requests for information. And even though this case was already scheduled to be heard in late November, I decided to move this forward because, quite frankly, we did not have enough resources to handle all the requests. And one of the things that I thrive to do in this office is to be very transparent in everything that we do.
I think he just said they were getting too many phone calls. I think that's what he just said. Hazel, let me ask you, because you've been so transparent and involved with this, and people, when they're talking about this story, everyone wants to talk to you, like I want to talk to you, right? So gauge to me, since the trial, the level of calls and inquiries that you have gotten through the years, and right now, has it turned into sort of a fevered pitch?
Oh my gosh, I've gotten more calls in the past month than I have in the past 30 years.
Everybody wants to speak with Hazel now. Through those 30 years, though, were there other times where things sort of bubbled up at all?
Occasionally, like every 5 years, there'll be the 25th anniversary of the murder verdicts, and somebody will want an interview, but not like this. This is crazy. This
is crazy. All right, Josh, you're in LA. There's more to the story, right? This is a prosecutor, a DA who's running for re-election. He's 24 points behind in the polls. Do you think this is happening now because of the power of the media, the power of the public, the power of Kim Kardashian, politics? What do you think is going on here?
Well, I mean, like he said, there have been dozens of documentaries on this. There's been thousands of articles, and there's been books written, serialized, dramatized series on this whole thing. So it's hard to say that it was entirely a media push. I will say the habeas on this case, which kind of brought this new evidence to light, was filed in May of last year, so we're over a year and a half since that time. But the thing that seems to have the most interesting timing is that we are in October, right before a November election, where he's up for election. And this does seem, a lot of people seem to speculate that does seem to make the timing interesting.
Yeah. Hazel, did you ever think this moment would happen through all the years?
I did think it might happen. I talk about it in terms of the Menendez miracles, and several things needed to happen before a miracle could take place, but all of the pieces are in place. We've had, over the past 30 years, we've had new evidence, we've had new laws, and we've had the wherewithal of the legal team and the family and the brothers.
Josh, looking at the landscape now, another big part of all of this that we've talked about, every time we talk about the case, is Me Too and the world we live in now. There's the big P. Diddy case that is rumbling through society. And I think there's more of an acceptance today as well that, yeah, this could have happened. These sexual assaults may very well have happened and maybe likely happened in the eyes of the more general public today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's if you want to shock yourself, take a look at some of the coverage and some of the entertainment response to the Menendez brothers' claims of abuse back 30 years ago. I'm talking about late night talk shows, Saturday Night Live. These men were mocked. I mean, they were ridiculed for ever even suggesting that they could have been the victims of sexual abuse. And I think that absolutely culturally we've had a dramatic shift in the way that we view this. And even the DA referenced that they, you know, I think if this trial were to take place today, it probably would have been handled very differently and certainly received by the public at large very differently than the way it was 30 years ago.
And Hazel, you were in the jury room, obviously, and there was a divide, and that divide was on gender lines?
It was I was on Erik's jury, and we had 6 men and 6 women. And we made the mistake of the first thing we did was we took a show of hands as to whether we thought Erik was guilty of murder. And 6 men thought he was guilty of murder, and 6 women thought he was guilty of manslaughter. So we had a lot to overcome in the next several weeks that we were deliberating, and we never did overcome it either.
Is there any contact through the years with other jurors, and has anyone changed their minds if you've spoken with them?
I've only had contact with a couple of the other women jurors. I do not know if any of the men have changed their minds. I'd like to know.
That would be interesting to see if their perspective is different at this point, because obviously the women saw it that way back then. Big thank you. Thanks, Josh Ritter and Hazel Thornton. Appreciate it. A lot more to talk about here, folks. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the Menendez brothers, convicted double murderers who actually planned and plotted the murders of their parents. Do they deserve a second chance? Are they suffering an injustice? Here's their story. The Menendez brothers' trial was one of the most divisive in court TV history. The story of 2 rich young men, Erik and Lyle Menendez, growing up in the lavish suburbs of New Jersey and Beverly Hills. Their dad, a record executive. They seemed to have life on a silver platter, but behind closed doors, things were bad. The brothers took a shotgun and killed their mother and father. Then they covered it up and lied about where they were. They spent tens of thousands of dollars in the months that followed until they were arrested and charged with murder. Then came the trial where they testified about years of physical and sexual abuse by their father. Everyone had an opinion. The public was split, and so were the juries. Then at a second trial, they were convicted and sentenced to life. Now it's once again on the national agenda, and again, everyone has an opinion about whether or not justice was served. And don't forget, you can watch this trial, the first trial where the cameras were, at courttv.com. It's there for free. Take a look at it. Let me show you a little piece of it. Let me show you the cross-examination of Erik and Lyle, talking about what they actually did the night they killed their parents.
Did you see him loading his gun?
I believe so. I don't specifically remember, but I believe so. And I know we did, so.
Was there any discussion at the car, any hesitation at the car?
No.
No?
No.
You never actually got into the car and said, let's get out of here?
No. The only thing I remember is me saying to Lyle, hurry.
Hurry?
Yeah.
Hurry what?
Hurry. That's the main thing I was thinking. I was saying it over and over again in my mind so that I wouldn't fall or I wouldn't lose myself. And I was just thinking, hurry. And I believe I said that to Lyle.
Did he he respond to you at all?
I don't remember him responding.
When you were saying hurry, did you mean to hurry up and load the gun, or hurry up, we got to go back and kill Mom and Dad?
I was thinking, hurry, we got to get there before they come out of the room.
When you say get there, what are you talking about?
Get to the den.
After you both loaded, you loaded first, you ran to the den doors, correct?
Yes.
And your brother was right behind you.
Yes.
Were the doors shut tight?
They were closed.
Did you open the left side and peek in?
No.
You didn't look in?
No.
When you stopped at the doors, did you listen to see if there's any talking, any conversation inside?
No.
So as soon as you got to that door, there's no hesitation, you just broke right into the door?
Yes.
Why is it that you continued to lie about your involvement in the crime? Was it because you didn't want to get caught?
I didn't want to go to jail. Well, I didn't want my brother to go either.
By the time you talked to Detective Zoller on September the 17th, you had already gotten $325,000 in an insurance settlement, correct?
Not sure the exact amount, but something like that.
Okay. And you were expecting that you would inherit your parents' estate at that time as well, correct?
We were at some point, yes.
Now, why is it that you never told the police the story that you've told to the juries here?
As far as what had happened that weekend or my whole life?
Well, yeah, what had happened that weekend and what prompted what happened that weekend? Why didn't you tell the police that? Why didn't you throw yourself on their mercy?
Well, I just felt, again, there were a lot of reasons, but the main one was that I didn't want to go to jail.
Clearly, he didn't want to go to jail. Knew he was getting the money. They stormed into the den, ambushed their parents. That's what they did. And now there's this wave of sympathy that they've done their time, it's time to get out. They were victimized by their father. So that brings me to my next question in this investigation. It's about Lyle and Erik. Are they victims or villains? How do you see them? How should we see them? This was premeditated. That's what they were convicted of, premeditated murder. They plotted it, they planned it. You heard the prosecutor himself, the prosecutor wants to set them free, is saying there's no way, this is not manslaughter, this is murder. Joining me now to help answer the question, criminal defense attorney, former LA County prosecutor Josh Ritter, and also with us, Deputy Public Defender, LA County, Philip Dubé. Great to see you both. Josh, I'll begin with you. I mean, this is premeditated murder with special circumstance, right? They're convicted of it. It doesn't get much worse than that in what they've been convicted of.
No, absolutely not. It's the worst that you can be convicted of. It's what can make you eligible for the death penalty. And you're absolutely right. It was premeditated. They went out and purchased shotguns. They went out and purchased shotguns in a way to kind of deliberately hide the fact that they purchased the shotguns. They went in there and filled their parents up to the point that they had to reload those shotguns. So there's no question about, is this a premeditated murder? The question comes down to, is there anything in mitigation to understand what compelled them to do that in that moment? And that's where kind of the devil's in the details starts to arise, when they were not allowed to present any evidence of imperfect self-defense in that second trial. And the option for a voluntary manslaughter in that second trial is where you begin to start to run into more uneasy to answer questions.
And a lot of it, of course, obviously has to do with the allegations of sexual abuse. Let's put this up on the screen. This is purports to be from a 1988 letter from Erik to his cousin Andy. Some people question the validity of the letter. Cousin Andy is not alive anymore. The letter was discovered allegedly by his mother after cousin Andy died. I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but what it's worth. but it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. He's so overweight that I can't stand to see him. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind. I know what you said before, but I'm afraid. You just don't know Dad like I do. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. Philip Dubé, this is sort of the cornerstone of the argument that there's corroboration of this sexual assault. Why didn't Erik or cousin Andy at the trial ever mention the letter?
That's a very good question, to be quite honest with you. And it could just be one of those missives or communiques, if you will, that nobody ever really thought about. And they probably felt that they had enough evidence without that letter, even if they knew about it. If that cousin was not available to testify, there would be no way for that letter to come in other than for Erik to say, yeah, I penned this letter, but you don't have anybody to corroborate having received it. So frankly, I just don't think they really needed it at the time. And if we're honest, Vinnie, on retrial, the same trial judge was so hostile to the defense, I don't think that letter would have mattered for purposes of allowing an imperfect self-defense. That judge was simply hell-bent on getting a conviction and finding some sense of finality with that trial so that he didn't have to retry it a third time.
It was a long trial. I mean, they're both long trials. Yes. Very long, yes. like almost OJ length trials. Let's take a look at this. This is from the petition for writ of habeas corpus, which really kind of got the ball rolling a while ago. In the fall of 1983, Menudo signed a multi-year deal with RCA Records. At the time, Jose Menendez was an executive at RCA. In 1983, 13-year-old Roy Rosello joined the group. During the trip to New York, Edgardo Diaz asked Roy to do a favor, instructing him to go downstairs at the hotel and join Jose Menendez in a limousine. Roy did so and was taken to a home in New Jersey, given wine by Jose Menendez, and anally raped. Roy lost consciousness and woke up back in his hotel. He was bleeding from the anus. He was in unbearable pain for a week. More of this corroboration of the nature of Jose Menendez and things that he is accused of doing. So Josh Ritter, taking that piece, the letter, the testimony, the allegations, where we are. Let's get to my question. Are these two victims or villains?
Both. If that's an option, I choose both because, you know, really what they did was heinous. There's no denying. They took the lives of their parents. Their parents were, no one was saying that they were actively being attacked. The boys were not in any kind of immediate peril. And they came in there and stone cold killed them with shotguns, including their mother, who, by the way, has never been wrapped up in these allegations of abuse. I know there's some idea she may have enabled or knew more about it than she let on. But at the same time, there was evidence, as some of that we're seeing and talking about this evening, of abuse. And the question becomes, well, should they have been allowed to present that to a jury? Should they have been allowed to allow a jury to make a decision on should they be held responsible for murder or manslaughter? The important thing to understand is they were never arguing in that first trial to be let walk out the back door free men. They were being asked to be convicted of manslaughter.
Josh Ritter, thanks so much. Philip Dubé is going to stay with us. Still to come, what happens if they get out?
They have been in prison for nearly 35 years. I believe that they have paid their debt to society.
One of the most successful true crime TV shows ever.
This is crazy.
Now has a new home on America's original true crime obsession, 48 Hours on Court TV. Coming up next on Court TV. The convicted murderer of the horrific honor killings.
What happened that night?
Speaks out for the first time on camera.
You make it sound like you're the victim here.
Exactly. Interview with a killer. Sunday, 8/7 Central on Court TV.
The people that begin their journey of rehabilitation and redemption in prison is often very internal. And what they do, and one of our lawyers pointed out this today, is usually the path is people try to further their education, do things for self-improvement, which the brothers have done, by the way. But it's more unique or less usual, I guess, when people not only do that, but they also begin to engage in ways to make life for others better. And in this case, the brothers have been doing so for a very long time, creating groups to deal with how to address untreated trauma, creating groups to deal with other inmates that have physical disabilities and may be treated differently. Even in one case, Lyle negotiating for other inmates as to the conditions that they live under during prison. And all this was done by two young people, now they're not as young, they had no hopes of ever getting out of prison.
That's the DA, George Gascon, gushing over the Menendez brothers and explaining their redemption and why he is doing everything in his power to get them released. Which brings me to my next question in this investigation. What happens if they get out? What's next? What happens if they're released back into the community? Still with me, Deputy Public Defender, LA County, Philip Dubé, and joining us, Director and Founder of Wall Street Consultants and the author of the book, Lies My Lawyer Told Me, prison consultant, Larry Levine. Larry, let me ask you, what will that transition be like for these brothers? 30 plus years of hard time, all of a sudden now you're 100% free.
Well, who's to say they're 100% free? There's several things that can happen. The parole board has to give them parole. They're still a convicted felon. The judge can say, well, I want you to do more time and then we're going to let you go. You're still a convicted felon. If Gascon really wanted to do something, he could have the charges dismissed. Then they're not a convicted felon, are they? So it's kind of up in the air. If they remain a convicted felon and they get outside, I mean, they know how to do social media. It's not like when I was in. These guys probably have tablets and such. I was locked up for 10 years, as you know, in the feds, and last thing I used was Windows 95, and I got out, it was a whole new world. I'm not really worried about them assimilating. Remember, mom and dad, despite the fact they blew their heads off, had a lot of money. Where did that money go? That money, it probably exists somewhere. So financially, they should, be just fine. But as far as what they're going to do, I don't see them working at Mickey D's or something, flipping burgers. They'll probably write a book. They'll get with a studio and do a documentary of their own. They think they'll be just fine, but, it's a transition. After 10 years, I can just imagine 30 years, I walked into a 7-Eleven and I looked around at everything. I'm like, wow, I could buy anything here I want. And they're going to have this whole psychological stigma. And then they're going to have people chasing after them for sure. Women are going to send, I think one of them is already married. They're going to get all kinds of women soliciting them, marriage proposals. I really don't think they're going to get any peace and quiet. And they're not going to have probably any peace for the rest of their lives. And a lot of people, me included, I've been mad at my parents. We've all been mad at our parents. Have you ever thought about putting a shotgun in your dad's mouth and blowing the back of his head out? No, it doesn't matter that whatever Gascon's going to do. I mean, who knows? The conference hasn't happened yet, but who knows what he's going to do? If he really wanted to help these guys and make things right, as I said, he would dismiss the charges. I believe they're guilty. They could have went to the cops, child services at any time. These guys weren't kids. One of them was, 19? The other one's 21?
19 and 21
These were adults.
at the time.
They could have left home anytime they wanted.
Philip, let me ask you about the money. In California, can they make money from, because they'll be convicted felons, can they make money telling the story of their crime? Can they, Philip, Are they entitled to what may be left from their inheritance?
That's great questions. First of all, they absolutely can make money. The Son of Sam laws are deemed unconstitutional based on our First Amendment jurisprudence. If there was a restitution order made by the court, or if a civil suit were filed against them for wrongful death, things of that nature, and a judgment was obtained, then the plaintiffs to that, what we call the judgment creditors, can execute on the judgment by seizing all the assets from any proceeds from a movie, a book deal, touring, anything like that, you know. As far as inheritance, California also has what's called a slayer statute, meaning you cannot inherit from a testator that you have executed. That's just simply the law of the state, and it's in our probate code here. But, you know, I'm a little concerned because there is no guarantee here, Vinnie, that parole will be granted to both. Could you imagine if this were a split outcome?
Wow, and one got
brother,
out, one didn't. Wow.
Exactly, only one gets out, you know.
Let me ask you this, Larry. Just before I run out of time, I have a couple questions I got to get to. How tough will it be for these guys to keep their noses clean? Because if they're out on parole.
Well, okay. Remember, if they get out on parole, they're still in custody. They're still locked out. They're just out on the street. If they kill parole and just let them get out, they're just like you or I. Well, I'm a felon, but they're still felons. So whatever they do, they're going to be under the spotlight. Imagine if one of them was speeding up Wilshire here in LA or something. You know, they get a ticket. Well, gee, you just violated. So like I said, they're going to be under a microscope the rest of their lives. And I believe that they'll be, like the DA said there, that you can't really inherit the money. So where does it go? What does it become, ill-gotten gains? It has to go somewhere. Do they give it to a victims fund for somebody else? I think that could be challenged in some way.
We shall see.
But then again, I'm not a lawyer.
Right.
He is. I deal in
And by the way, you
common
just
sense.
gave Philip a promotion to DA from public defender. Only kidding, Philip.
I apologize.
Equal
okay?
positions.
Get my book. Hey, lies my lawyer told me. Go to the Wall Street Prison Consultant site. Click on the lies tab, and you'll find out what I think about lawyers and what they do for people.
Gotcha. Philip, let me ask you, do you think you're in LA? You think these guys are going to be celebrities?
Oh, sure, I do. Not right away. Vinnie, in California, when an inmate is released from prison, they get a whopping $200. We call it gate money. And it's for basic necessities, basically to get them home, frankly. Then they'll be ordered to report to parole. The problem in California is when you're released for murder on parole, you are on parole for life. And that means if there's just some evidence of a violation of the terms of parole, you can go right back to prison. You know, but the world is their oyster right now. If they want to move out of state, they can apply for an interstate transfer of parole. They might have family out of state where they have a fixed address. And I'm sure there are relatives out there who will make them feel at home.
Oh, there are.
And
there are relatives supporting them, although one isn't.
Yes.
Kitty's brother, their uncle, not supporting them. Philip Dubé, Larry Levine, great to see you both. Thank you so much. I generally believe that if you plan and plot the murder of another human being, it should be game over. Game over. Life without the possibility of parole, or you end up maybe on death row. The law does not always agree with my personal philosophy, and some cases are much more nuanced. I wish the Menendez brothers' second trial was recorded on video, but the judge didn't want us to see it, and now more than 30 years later, we're stuck trying to figure out if justice was served. It would have been a whole lot clearer if the judge was a whole lot more transparent, and that's why I still have a lot of questions. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues.